the premise of from each their ability and to each their need. We give what we can and we take what we need. Now, a lot of people hear that and they think barter. I will give you 50 apples and you'll give me 30 plums, and we'll assume that 50 apples and 30 plums are equal to each other. But that's not mutual aid at all. Mutual aid is a gift economy where you literally do whatever you can that does not exceed your capacity, and you do it for whoever will be most helped by it. And then you expect that from others. You give to the whole and you receive from the whole.
Welcome to Deconstructing Therapy, transforming therapy and the therapists who lead it. Let's deep dive into conversations, reshaping therapy into a powerful tool for healing, liberation, and systemic change. Join us as we challenge the status quo, reimagine care, and celebrate therapists breaking barriers. Let's transform therapy together. Today, I'm so excited to have my good friend with me, HollyRose. HollyRose Baker is an anarchist, organizer, and activist living in the South. She helped to co-found the Lower Alabama Native Plant Society, in which she coordinates to distribute free plants and seeds, to remove invasive species, and to help train people in the many crafts and skills that rely on those plants, like basket making, forging, rope making, and so much more. Over the past decade, she has also focused extensively on mutual aid work, helping to house many people who would have otherwise been homeless. She coordinates to provide free food distribution to homeless communities and at local queer events.
The sun is shining, my plants are growing. You can't have a bad day, if as long as there's growing things, then you can walk around,
Holly is the first non-therapist that I am interviewing on this podcast. So a lot of what I've learned throughout this year and through even doing this podcast right now is about how healing is so much bigger than what can happen in the therapy room. And a lot of my own personal growth has come from my relationship with Holly and kind of the way she moves through this world in this deep understanding of community and really building that, embodying that, and connection to the earth. There's been so many times where we're just walking around or talking about strategies, and she'll just be like, wait, stop, look at a tree, get out of your damn head, like really, really look at that tree, connect. And it's helped me so much more than certain things that could happen in that isolation of that therapy room. So I wanted to understand your own personal growth with this, any of your relationship that you've had with therapy or relationship you've had with your own healing. Like how have you gotten to this place where you've really been able to get this healing and this growth and this evolution through your community mindset?
Whenever I was a kid, I was definitely the kind of kid who I would say I don't know how to have fun. And it was like I felt like I hadn't taken that class yet, like no one had ever taught me like how to find beauty and joy in the world and stuff like that. Like I was very much in this, like, I have work to do and I need to get it done. I grew up on a farm and doing like a lot of physical labor very, very young. And so I think I just kind of got into that, like, get stuff done mindset. Whenever I was a kid, I started going to therapy after one of my friends passed away. And my parents, very small town, very rural. Even still, they were like, our kid needs help. We're going to try to do the right thing. We're going to bring this kid to a therapist. And I really do very much appreciate that. But for me, that experience was like, I went from being this kid who didn't know how to have fun, didn't know how to enjoy the world, to being this kid who was like very deeply depressed, like coming to terms with like the concept of death, coming to terms with like sort of this intense loneliness that I had. I didn't have a lot of friends at school. So I just kind of felt like very purposeless, very much like a purposelessness. And like I didn't have any skills to cope or find joy in the moment. And then I went to therapy and they put me through all these assessments. They were like, oh, you have anxiety. And I was like, I don't know what that word means. And the therapist never really explained it to me. She turned and told my parents what it meant, but she didn't put it in terms that I could understand. I kind of had these kind of repetitive experiences where I would go to these therapists, I would try to talk to them about stuff. They would inevitably break confidentiality, tell my parents something that I had said that just made me feel more and more lonely. And also a lot of them were very much in this like punishment mindset. And I think partially because of the way that like we handle things like suicidality and like threats of self-harm and stuff like that. So my favorite things to do were hunt and archery and woodworking. It was very much like everything you like to do is a threat. And so you can't do anything you enjoy, right? Every single one of my hobbies kind of was just taken away from me. And it was also like my family was so embarrassed by how depressed I was, by my suicidality, that they kind of kept me kind of locked away. Like it was like, well, we don't want you to go talk to people. You're not allowed to go see your friends. And so as I got into my teen years, I went from like this very isolating experience to even more isolating experience because of my interactions with these therapists. And like the other aspect of it is that so many of the times I would go to these therapists and I would try to explain, this is how I'm feeling, this is how I'm lonely. And a lot of them, I would be going to the city to see them, and I was from a rural area. They didn't understand what it was like to be in a rural area. They'd say, "Why don't you make new friends?" And I would say, "There's no new people where I live. I know everyone where I live. There's one school within 40 minutes of me. I know all the children my age. I don't really get along with them. I made a bad impression whenever I was 2 or 3 years old, and that just stuck." I don't know. I kind of just found that therapy didn't work for me. I would be talking to these therapists, and they would
Yeah.
just let me keep talking, talking. They wouldn't really have anything to say back to me.
Wait, I just want to slow down here because it seems like there's so many things you're bringing up that are like little red flags. And be like, yeah, this is what happens in just a very traditional Western mindset in therapy. Because what you intuitively knew as that child was like, I'm lonely, I need connection, and I need joy, and I need to play. Like playing is just so fundamental to who we are as kids. And when that's robbed of us, it can really be damaging. And so when you went to that space, they looked at your anxiety and they didn't look at you as a human being, right? Let's pathologize this. Let's look at this. And then let's also, well, we're fearful of this. And so you were picking up on everybody's fear of what this anxiety or this depression is going to do, the suicidality. And then they can get wrapped up in, well, I have to be complicit and I have to make sure I do these suicide contracts and keep this person safe. But in doing that, they were robbing you of connection and really seeing the loneliness that you were like, I want to connect with somebody. I'm a child. I want to play. I want to feel joy.
Exactly. It was like very much like no addressing of any underlying issues, but just like if we talk through it enough and if we get you on the right medicine, you'll be fine. That didn't really work to me. It worked for me. And my last therapist that I had was in my freshman year of college. I went to a therapist and she ended up at some point like just yelling at me about like activism I was doing because she didn't think it was the right way to be an activist. And she was seeing someone who was a friend of mine and she ended up talking about me to that person in one of their sessions. So I've actually only had one therapist out of 7 that didn't break confidentiality for me. The more I talk to people in my life who like have been to therapy, like that's the norm. Like for most people I know. To me, that highlights like one of the flaws in the system, which is that like I was actually looking for connection. I was looking for people who like would be near me, would be in community with me. And part of being in community with people is like that you have these like kind of mixed relationships. You go to church together and like you talk to them outside of that and things like that. And I think a lot of therapists are also kind of craving that. And so that leads them to say, well, what if I could involve the parents in this? And then they break confidentiality, right? And what if I, could like involve this person's friend that I also know in this and they break confidentiality? But then those things aren't done with any intentionality. They're not done in any kind of thoughtful way, no transparency.
Yeah.
And
But
it
I like that
causes all
you're
of these
even
issues.
seeing the spirit behind it. Like the spirit behind them doing this wasn't just to harm me. It was because that innate understanding of we need community. This is not something I'm going to do in this isolated state with this other person. But then they did it in this authoritative way and this kind of betrayal of trust. Okay. So you went to 7 therapists, you kept going to therapy. Your parents kind of had that value set too of like, okay, something's wrong, some emotional thing is going on, let's go to therapy. So at what point did you switch gears and saying, okay, my answers are not going to keep coming from this therapy room or a different therapy room? Like,
I was in college. I decided that was the best there. I feel like that was the best therapist I ever had. She was actually helping me in a lot of ways. And yet it was also this kind of hurtful thing. And I think I just had this realization that like professionals are not perfect and that like nobody in any position of like, professionalism is this godly, eternal, angelic figure who always has it right. And like, if that's what I'm looking for, I'm inherently getting it wrong. And I also just kind of like, my life started to improve. I got away from like where I grew up. There were new people to meet. I was doing all this activism and a lot of it wasn't necessarily the most helpful stuff, but some of it was, we would go feed people, we would like help house people, we would go like do community gardening or like just scraping the mud off of someone's driveway so because they kept like crashing into their garage. And I was like, oh wow, I have purpose, and I have purpose that I get to decide. I get to decide when I show up. I get to decide when I do these things. And then the people that I was in community with, a lot of them were these activists from the 60s and the 70s. They had been working through their own problems forever. And that's always been my experience. I feel like I had got so much more out of talking to my great grandmother than I did out of going to my first therapist, you know? And I feel like I got so much more out of just like hanging out with old people in my hometown and like helping them build wheelchair ramps and listening to their stories than I ever did out of going to therapy, because they had spent a lifetime dealing with the same issues that I was dealing with and figuring out, how do I say this in a way that would save someone else time? Because it can take us 20 years to come to a realization that takes us 5 seconds to communicate. So what I've kind of really moved to over time is like mutual aid self-therapy and like mutual aid therapy, where I talk to people that I love. I work through my issues with them and they work through their issues with me. And it's not like tit for tat. It's not a barter system where,
Right.
oh, I've worked through this level of issue with you, so now you get to cash that in. It's just that we take care of each other when we need it, and we put up appropriate boundaries when we need it. To me, that works so much better, because those people also have like the context of my actual life. Those people can help me address systemic issues. They can say, oh, well, let's call our mutual friend so-and-so, because it sounds like one of your issues is that you're having issues finding rides to pick up your prescriptions or whatever. Right. And so it's like we can work from this angle that's not just this like psychological, what's in your head angle, but like what's in your life, right? We can be in community with each other. We can meet each other's actual needs.
They see me in context. That's a huge piece, right? They're not just seeing me as this problem, this child with anxiety or depression, and just like, let's try to fix her head.
It's instead like, I pick up my phone and I call people I love, right? I mean, that's a huge element of it. But I do also feel like the other element of it for me has just been like finding genuine purpose, And I do think like another issue that like therapy kind of tends to have is that if you're a therapist, you're most of the time only really interacting with people who are in really bad times of their lives. And you're only really interacting with people who are like, who feel aimless and who feel purposeless. And so you can't really learn from your clients a lot of the things that would help some of your other clients. You can to an extent, right? But to me, when I go and I am like helping one of like the old people down the street dig up all their sweet potatoes, and then they give me a third of them and then they keep the rest, I'm sitting there and it's like, well, I know I am feeding someone by doing this. I know I'm learning about my relationships with the earth, right? I know that like we're exchanging this information about like, how can we do this in a way that's more ecologically sound, right? And I actually feel that I have something of value. Because it's true. I mean, it's undeniably true that I am valuable in that way. Like, I am in relationship to the ecosystems and the social ecosystems around me. And that to me is just so much more fulfilling than what I find in a lot of therapy, which is you're accepting the premise to refute it, right? We say, well, someone says, oh, I feel like I'm evil. And then we say, oh, well, you're not evil, you're good, right? Well, it's like, well, what if we abandoned that concept of good and evil and said, well, yeah, you've hurt and you will continue to hurt, and you've helped and you'll continue to help. So like, let's minimize what you can hurt and let's figure out how you can help. Can you go help, like visit people in the hospital, right? Will that be fulfilling to you? I think a lot of times we have this mindset of like, we need to fix ourselves first, and then one day we'll show up as the perfect angel for our community and we won't need anything ever again. There are things that we have some innate capacity to and ability to, but like being able to look at the ridges on a tree and see that it's beautiful is something you learn by doing, right? Being able to find something funny, right? Like I was watching Bridgerton last night and I'm thinking, when I was a kid, I wouldn't understand any aspect of why this is interesting to watch. But now as an adult, I'm like, oh yes, human relationships are so fascinating, and the way people interact with each other. And oh wow, the costumes. And I'm thinking about like the way that people have been making textiles for 40 or 50,000 years. And it's like, you can choose to be in awe of all of that, but only if you have the skill set to know what to even be in awe of, right? You can choose to be silly, but you have to take your silliness seriously. And to me, like, if we're thinking about like, what is the role of like talk therapy? That is a huge part of it, right? is figuring out like, well, what are these skill sets that we might think of that are like, that are kind of, we assume to be innate? And how do we actually communicate to people how they can hone those skill sets? Instead of trying to always face the problem head on, face everything around it, you know? Like, I don't think that the way that we treat anxiety all of the time is that we then just try to fight the anxiety. We try to medicate the anxiety. I think it's like, well, what's the easiest aspect of your life that we can improve? You know, if it's like figuring out a better way for like you to manage the dishes with your roommates, like that will probably improve your anxiety, right? If it's like, oh, you need to honestly go back to driving school because you didn't learn how to do that or something, and you're terrorizing yourself and other people around you and you're anxious.
If you were to go back to that 10-year-old that went to therapy and then they were just looking to death at the anxiety, right? And sometimes when you look at the anxiety to death and you keep talking about it, you're actually reinforcing the negative pattern. What would you say to her back then? What did she need to be looking at around it?
10-year-old me, like all of us, was doing the best I could with the information and the circumstances I had at the time. I could say, like, learn to love the things that you already love and to find worth in that. Have compassion for your parents, but don't obey them ever. But ultimately, I really think that like the question of like, well, what would I tell my 10-year-old self to make my life better is like, my 10-year-old self could not have made my 10-year-old self's life better. I was like in circumstances that were beyond my control. There was no easy out, you know, like my mom was incredibly, incredibly sick. I was taking care of her. I was taking care of my intellectually disabled sister and my intellectually disabled aunt. I was helping run a farm. I was going to work for other people to raise money to help support them.
Well, you're kind of saying it right now. I think this is what you needed to hear, right? It's like there is no way out right now. This is hard. We're not going
Yeah.
to label this and medicate this away. You're only 10. Of course you're anxious. Of course you're stressed. This isn't your fault. This is not anything that has to do with your personality or your brain. Like the environment that you're in is not fair.
Well, and it's like, I mean, I talk to people I know who are in the mental health profession, and what do they say is like, you know, half my clients have SLS, shit life syndrome. Like, you know, it's like they don't need a therapist, they need an improvement in circumstances, you know? And personally, that's where it's like, we can spend a lot of time talking to each other about ways of coping and everything, but at some point we have to change the circumstances. At some point we have to commit ourselves to building a liberatory future. One where 10-year-olds don't need to work. One where our health care is not enough to drive people to that level of desperation, right? Like when we're like, we can get the care that we need for free. That's really where we need to move with a lot of this kind of stuff.
How do we see people in context and then really get the heaviness of what's around everybody and start changing systems?
I think this is another one of the issues that we have whenever we talk to therapists is like when my friends say, well, I want to go to therapy, but the first 3 sessions will just be telling them my history. And even then they won't really get it because I'm trying to give them like the cliff notes, the important parts. We're putting ourselves into these narrative arcs that aren't actually like reflective of our real lived experiences. Like it's never just one thing, you know, and it's never just this one story and this one journey. I think that because therapy is often angled at like, what are these problems we can fix? What are these specific traumas we can isolate and work through? What are the specific contexts of those traumas? It's like, we're really even then stripping away the whole personhood.
So even as we're sitting here right now and you're trying to put context into it and trying to make it into this small linear story, you're like, something's not fitting.
Life is a non-linear story and there's never a first. People say, well, when's the first time you realized you're trans? And it's like, oh, 50 times. There were 50 first times, you know? And I'm sure 50 more that I don't remember. None of these things are ever as simple as we make it out to be. Every moment that we're talking about here was days, weeks, months, years of experiences. I think a lot of times when we try to put this into these simple narratives, we turn ourselves into caricatures rather than seeing ourselves as people. That's why I tend to talk to people and like say, well, like more of like, what have you learned? Where are you at now? And then the context fills itself in as it's relevant.
What do you think is missing here? What if you were to talk about like, this is my belief system, this is who I am now, these are the truths that I really walk in the earth with, what would that be?
At my core, I'm an anarchist. Anarchy can be defined in a lot of different ways. One of them is traditionally is non-domination. But I really like the definition of anarchy as responsibility. Anarchy is when we take responsibility for the well-being of the world while abandoning the notion that we could ever control it. And so there's no one fix, right? If you were put in on power of everything tomorrow, you wouldn't be able to fix everything right now. But you always can do your part, right? You always have your responsibilities.
But that is big. It's this mix of taking control and autonomy of it and then also letting go at the same time.
Exactly. In reality, it's the same as the Serenity Prayer to an extent. And it is really just saying, like, well, what can I do to make the world better? What is my part? One element of that is that, like, I see my beautiful friends who do so much work to care for the world. And then I look and I say, they're doing that. So I can help in my little way. But I also know it's not all on me because I see the good that they're doing. So what's on me is to be a good part of that whole, that ecosystem. In the same way that, like, when you're growing a Three Sisters garden, right? You don't expect the corn to fix the nitrogen. That's the beans do that. And so the corn can focus on growing tall and getting like strong and concentrating all these nutrients into this very specific piece, right? And it's like figuring out how to be this good part in the whole, but that requires other people doing their part as well. And so that's why it's so important to find these communities of other people who are trying to make the world better and then to grow in reflection, but also kind of like indifference to them. I know enough mushroom people, so I don't need to know very much about mushrooms. I have a flower guy. I'm not really worried about flowers, So I focus on native fruit and nut trees and I grow those and I give them away because then I know that everybody around me will be fed and, whenever those trees produce. And a lot of those trees won't produce until long after I'm dead. And that's fine because I'm doing my part, nothing more, nothing less.
And so it's a real trust in the whole. I am a piece of this whole, and I have to take that responsibility seriously, but also humbly to know that I'm a piece of this whole, and I might not even, I won't see it till completion.
Well, there is no completion. They say, the ends justify the means, but then Ursula Le Guin says, what if there is no end? What if all we have is means? What if the only way that the world is built is through the actions that we take day to day? Like every system that we're in, all of material reality is just made up of all the parts. We're all part of the same whole. You do your part, and therefore the whole comes to reflect it. You don't necessarily end capitalism and white supremacy and all that in one day. You build these structures that exist outside of it in opposition to it and also entangled in it because nothing is ever separate, but you try to disentangle them over time. You try to make them stand on their own. You try to make them provide infrastructure that makes us rely less on these other systems over time. To me, that's the beauty of it all. That's the responsibility of it all.
Because it's a mix of like this indifference and then also this responsibility. It's so many things that feel contradictory, but they make this bigger whole.
So in the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu says, do you think you can improve the world? I don't think you can. And I love the Tao Te Ching. It's this incredibly good book of wisdom that's very, very old. And there's so many translations of it. And a lot of them say almost contradicting things. But that one always feels like a gut punch to me as somebody who wants to make the world better, as someone who wants to help towards liberation, right? Oh, I don't think you can improve the world. Then Lao Tzu also says to be like the water and sink to the low places and nurture all things. Well, inherently, that's this process of improving. That's this process of growing. And in that contradiction is where we see the truth. It's not so much that you can't make the world any better. It's more that you cannot reshape the world from your imagination alone.
You have this humility, but also this responsibility. And that feels like a very delicate balance. And I do want to talk about this in depth because I see so many activists struggling with this and also healers in a lot of ways, right? Because we all have therapists, activists, all of us have this deep sense of we want to help. We have this deeper sense of empathy. Most of us have had some level of marginalization, oppression, or pain or trauma that we've dealt with, and that allows us to really feel these things in a deeper way and wanting to impact them. And I see that we get stuck where we're like, okay, we're going to go change the world. We're going to fix everything. We're going to deep dive in and then get burnt out and go away. right? And then kind of just check out like a lot of people do and just like, okay, let me just like kind of give into the system. Let me just live in it and like, try to put blinders on about how heavy everything is because I can't do anything about it. And you seem like you really sit in that middle ground space of this is the long game. This is how I'm just living life. I'm not trying to really change or make this huge impact quickly. And so how do you do that? And like how, what would you say? I'm sure you've encountered like younger activists too who have that fire in them who want to like change everything at once. Like how can you portray this to them?
Well, what I would say is that like burnout is as much of a neglect of responsibility as like apathy. Do everything you can, not an ounce more, not an ounce less. That is very important. It's constantly a process of correction, right? Finding that middle path. But it's also do things that are efficient, that are helpful, that feel like you're actually getting something done. You will never be able to help everybody. It does not matter how good you are. Now, that does not mean that anyone is beyond the ability to be helped. It just means that you and your circumstance right now cannot help them. I mean, I've done like a lot of rehousing work, and my failure rate, which is totally fine with me, is 30%, right? I cannot rehouse 30% of people who come to me ask for help. And the sooner I can learn to spot that I'm not going to be able to help that particular person, the less time of theirs I can waste and the less of other people's resources I can waste. And that's not because there's anything wrong with them. It's because I am not the person to help them. That's really the matter of it. I think you have to have a measured sense of urgency. If everything needs to get done as fast as possible, the best way to do that is not to rush. When I was a kid, my dad, somebody was saying, "Oh, I need this done fast, I need this done fast." And my dad said, "Well, it'll take about 10 minutes." And the guy said, "Well, how long if you rush?" My dad said, "At least 20." And that's the truth. I mean, if you rush to start an organization, if you rush to try to get someone housed, if you surpass your ability, you are guaranteed to mess it up more thoroughly than you otherwise would have. And you're guaranteed to take so much out of yourself that you cannot continue the work. Work that is not sustainable is work that will not be sustained. Putting these intentional limits, saying what you want to do, and also setting incredibly long-term goals. I tend to think first on like the 10 to 15,000 year scale of things, and then I wind myself back down. So it's like most of like my moment to moment thoughts are like about crop improvements. How do we as like people living in this area create a system in which like the hickory trees produce for a little bit longer? They're more nutritious. They come clean up the nut a little bit easier, right? And then it's like you work your way all the way back to, and that's why I need to do the dishes right now. Because you see that it's all actually in context of one another. If you want to build a viable food system for everybody in the world to make sure everyone's fed, well, the way that you do that is not going to be by having more intensive annual crops. It's going to be by having these incredibly beautiful mixed systems of multi-generational planting. Well, that's going to mean crop improvement on a long scale. The way that you get there, though, is that you feed people now. So that means relying on some of the systems that exist as they exist. But it also means that, like, you need to have clean dishes to feed those people on. Because they're never going to be all that good at helping you to like plant thousands of hickory trees and sort through them to figure out which ones are the best for replanting if they're hungry. And so if you don't go to the kitchen and do the dishes right now, your activism is useless because there's really no point in doing it and you're going to suck at it because you're going to be hungry. So it's just kind of like putting everything into its context and seeing that none of it is disconnected. If you're living your life correctly, the joy, the time that you spend watching TV, laughing with your partner, that is part of the work, not a distraction from it. Joy is why we fight. Joy is why we're here. There's no point in doing any of this stuff if at the end of it we all end up as somber, self-hating revolutionaries who think that we're too corrupted to live in the world we want to build. No, we have to model it now. The seeds of the future exist in the present. Rest is part of the work. When you abandon rest, you abandon the work. Now, you can't lean too far into it. It's like what happened to me was like I burned out so hard that combined with my genetic predispositions, and I was bedridden for 2 years, That was not doing the movement favors. Like, I worked myself so hard. I was in fights with all these neo-Nazis. I was getting thrown to the ground by the police every day. All of that stuff made me feel very revolutionary and very, very strong. But I think of like, why am I putting myself in this position instead of going and like planting trees and pulling up invasive species? Well, I'm doing it because it feels like I need to do the most drastic thing that I can. because the system is so bad. The moment is so bad. So I need to do the most drastic thing that I can. Well, that's self-harm. That is throwing yourself under the tank to get run over. That's not the same thing as launching a resistance. That's not the same thing as being a guerrilla fighter, right? That's just letting yourself be killed. If we're thinking tactically, we have to refuse to waste ourselves. We have to refuse to see ourselves as disposable trash that can get withered away under the boot of the hierarchs. We are not that. We are real, living, beloved people who have a job to play. If you believe in a revolution to overthrow the state or whatever, the thing that you need is infrastructure. The way that you build infrastructure is that you befriend a bunch of old ladies, and they cook dinner and they invite you to their house whenever you're getting chased by the police, right? And they teach you how to sew, and you patch up all your clothes instead of having to go to the store and rely on that kind of stuff. And then you save a little bit of your money and you put it towards things that help. And it's like all of this kind of stuff to me, it's like, it's so purposeful. It's so wonderful. It also, it makes you almost immune to despair. I let myself feel despair. I give myself permission on my mourning days. When I go to a funeral, I give myself a couple hours to just feel totally lost. On Trans Day of Remembrance every year, I let myself sob and cry. But then I say, okay, well, I see, as the parents of these trans people that have been murdered, want to go and help talk to parents who are a little bit hesitant about their kids. So let's go help them do that so that less trans kids get murdered. And it's like people talk about climate change and how we're doomed. Well, I don't see that. I see people doing controlled burns every chance that they can. I see people planting native fruit and nut trees just as soon as you give them access to them. I see people who live in apartments saying, how can I go help these old people in their gardens, right? I see the old people saying, how can we not lose this land to some investor when I die? How can I return it to the community? I see people fighting tooth and nail to save these endangered species. I see people doing it through legal and illegal means. Like, I see people going to these places that are getting developed and stealing everything that they can, or even trying to block the development so that they can try to put all of those species back into right relations. I see other people.
You're seeing the human fight in all of this. It's not just looking at everything and saying, oh my God, everything's so bad, everything's so catastrophic, and now I just got to be this like urgent fighter that just fights everything with this heaviness, because you're just killing yourself in that. You're just owning that I'm already failed.
I think if you think we're doomed, we're doomed. I accept the real possibility of failure. I mean, every revolutionary military conflict or anti-colonial struggle has the opportunity to fail because we get overwhelmed. I just don't see that as a reason to give up.
It looks like you're creating a different picture of what success looks like too, because it's not just fighting like hell and going crazy into the activism and feeling like this revolutionary and then defeating it. Like, that's so unrealistic. In the midst of it, you're actually creating that world that you're seeking to create, and you're noticing it. It's already there in so many ways.
We were talking about means and unity, and I kind of think about it this way. We get these things backwards. We think one day we'll get people mad enough, we'll make it, people's lives will be bad enough, and we'll get them class conscious enough that they have nothing to lose, and they'll kill everybody who's bad, or they'll take over the state, or whatever. We'll have our revolution, and then we'll make things right. You have it backwards, right? The actual answer is, you build a world that is survivable while the other world is dying. You build the infrastructure of care. Inevitably, the people who want your money and your time, and they want to capture you into their systems, they will come and they will try to destroy what you've built. So they've done to indigenous peoples around the world forever. That is the revolution, is the moment you defend the infrastructure from the people who are trying to destroy it. Our goal is not to have a fight. Our goal is to take care of each other. We accept that someone might try to take that away and try to make us basically capture us, put us into bondage. But at that same moment, we know the fight is not the point. The infrastructure is the point. The community is the point.
Yeah, you say that, and everybody always says in activists, oh, community, we got to do community. But you're saying it in such a different way. It's like we're doing it during the fight. It's not like we're getting to this massive battle and we're trying to wake everybody up and then we'll relax when we get there. Because that's even a colonial mindset too, right? I have to do the work and then I'll relax when I get there. They're like, no, we have to do that now. We have to have the world we want to live in now.
Exactly. And the work is the pleasure too. All of this is enjoyable if you're doing it right. Feeding people should not be exhausting. It should be fulfilling. It should be renewing. If it's exhausting, you're doing it wrong. You're doing it in a way that's not sustainable for you. You're trying to go buy a bunch of food from Sam's Club so you can cook it to give it away and you're spending all your money. No, no, no. Feeding people is like you take the excesses of our current system and you utilize those. You take everything that's left over from somebody's wedding and you give it to homeless people. You have potlucks and then you put everything into go cups and you take it around to folk. That's the system.
You're countering the system actively, always,
Yeah.
in your joy, in your like feeding people and everything that you're doing in creating this infrastructure. And it's happening simultaneously. Yeah.
I think we have this mistake of the word community is a buzzword, right? Just like solidarity and mutual aid has become. I hear people say mutual aid network, and what they mean is GoFundMe network, right? Well, that's not really mutual aid. That's just like redirecting the forces of capital. And we
Yes.
say solidarity is though solidarity is when we hold up a sign and not when we act on each other's behalf with each other's interest. And we say community as though community is when you know people. Community is not just knowing people. It's not liking people. It's not agreeing with people. Community is when you rely on a group of enmeshed people to meet needs. Community is where you go to get your needs met. It might be a very conservative religious person down the street who disagrees with you on absolutely everything except for growing sweet potatoes. And so you
Right.
go to their house and you dig up sweet potatoes together and you say, well, Ted, that's some weird stuff you said, like, let's work through it. And you will work through it the more you harvest sweet potatoes with them. But at the end of the day, he gave you 50 pounds and you're going to go feed somebody else with it. That's community.
It's an enmeshed group of people that meet each other's needs. Yeah. That's beautifully said. And that we can keep doing it. It's not this big battle that we're waiting for.
It's a process.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about using this mindset and then your mindset on mutual aid?
So mutual aid is the premise of from each their ability and to each their need. We give what we can and we take what we need. Now, a lot of people hear that and they think barter. I will give you 50 apples and you'll give me 30 plums, and we'll assume that 50 apples and 30 plums are equal to each other. But that's not mutual aid at all. Mutual aid is a gift economy where you literally do whatever you can that does not exceed your capacity, and you do it for whoever will be most helped by it. And then you expect that from others. And so I might go and give, some people down the street some hazelnut trees because they're the ones with like the opening in their front that has space for them. Now, I'm not expecting them necessarily to ever give me anything back, but I do know that people say, oh, Holly, she's the girl that gives away all these trees. So I'll give her like, some free food, or like I'll give her rides places because, she's helping, right? You give to the whole and you receive from the whole. And then what you're trying to do in that is build an infrastructure of abundance and basically just free stuff. So it's like if everybody has an abundance of fruit and nut trees, you have an abundance of fruit and nuts in the community. People will say, oh, I have way too many hazelnuts. I'm going to process a lot of this into like Nutella, mix some nut butter. But honestly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take those homeless guys down the street and I'm going to say, please pick as many of these as you can. You're not necessarily going to give the hazelnuts back to me because I'm the one who gave you the tree. And I don't necessarily need you to, because whenever that person gives those hazelnuts away to the people who are around them, they are all more secure and they all have more to offer to everyone else around them. And eventually that comes back to me. Maybe one of them says, well, I'm so well fed, I don't really need to garden, I don't really want to garden, so I'm going to go study medicine. And then maybe that person says, I'm so well fed and somebody else helped me build my house, I don't really have any expenses, I'm not going to charge anything to do medicine. And then maybe that person becomes my doctor. And that's what mutual aid is. It's the ways in which we build these interconnected communities of care. It's the ways in which we say from each their ability to each their need. Well, how do we foster that ability? How do we grow that? How do we share that ability? How do we teach each other? Right? How do we take and say, I need this thing, you need that thing. They solve each other. So a good example of that is like, let's say you have somebody in your community who is a much older person, needs help transferring in and out of their wheelchair, needs help going to the bathroom, and needs help cooking dinner every day. And then you have somebody else in your community who's homeless, but otherwise is physically and emotionally, mentally capable of doing those things for them. Well, you can keep one person from going to a nursing home and keep one person off the street if you put those people together. So that's another element of mutual aid where we're just trying to say, well, where are two problems equaling a solution? And then our job is, as anarchists, as people who accept our responsibility to the world but abandon the desire to control it, we go into that and say, okay, well, how do we mediate between these people? How do we take a step back when we know that they're asking us for things they don't actually need, or whenever they could work through things on their own, or just asking for us for things that we ourselves cannot provide? How do we become in community with those people? It really works out so beautifully.
Because you see the world that way. I am really kind of flipping a switch in my head of the goal is to build the infrastructure. It's not to just wake people up and start shoving ideology down their throats and get us to this revolution. We are actively building the infrastructure and then seeing where it's already there.
Seeing where it's already there is very important.
Anything from what we're talking about today that you could give people on a practical note, if you were to take one or two things that we're talking about, if somebody wants to start shifting their mindset and really start being in community in a different way, how can they start?
Learn practical skills that are fun. I have a friend who's getting into bike repair. They love it. Their hands feel useful. It makes them feel like they did something productive with their day after they got off work at a place where they don't feel like they're actually helping the world. And they've been doing that for a while. And I rehouse homeless people by doing this matchmaking between people who need someone to come live with them for whatever reason and people who need a place to stay. Well, a lot of my homeless people need bikes, right? Because bikes are transportation. They can go to the food bank. They can get a job. It changes their life intensely. So this person, by doing a skill that they love, that they wanted to do, that could in any way be helpful to other people, just by meeting me and me meeting them, we have both increased our capacity to help others.
And it sounds like it happened organically.
Sometimes I'll go on the dating apps and just say, I'm looking for other people who want to do helpful things. But I go to church and I meet people. I go for walks. I go to litter pickups, and that's where you meet people. But having something to offer is really, really helpful. And then having a list of skills like I would learn if I had the supplies for. Let's say somebody offers you a sewing machine one day and you're like, I could get into sewing and I could get into repairing people's clothes for them so that they have to rely less on that. That's really useful. The other thing that I would say is learn to be a good roommate. Learning to live with other people on a one-to-one level in a household setting always applies to learning to live with people in community. We like to think of these great communalist societies as our goal, but a lot of us don't really know how to be good at taking turns doing the dishes or how to manage a household division of labor.
Because then you're killing the sustainability if you're not honing on to things that you actually enjoy. Because the stuff that you don't enjoy, somebody else might enjoy it.
If it's something you don't enjoy but you're skilled at, what I like to say is learn a little bit, learn enough that you could point someone to the right direction of how to start. If that's something you're interested in. There's a lot of skills I don't particularly enjoy, but I'll sit and try to figure out, do 30 minutes of research to say, if somebody asked me about this, where would I point them? But focus mostly on the things that you enjoy. Get outside and learn to identify some plants. There's good apps like Seek, iNaturalist. iNaturalist is great. A social network for identifying plants and animals. Learning the names of the plants in the world around you makes you very, very helpful. I educate people on native plants, and I would say that maybe 1 in 10 people can name 15 plants. So just being able to learn those kinds of things, because then you can start to pull up the invasives. You can start to plant the natives. You can start to learn what's edible, what's useful out here. And I've seen that change people's lives, homeless people in particular.
So that's a big way of how we're disengaging from these systems and being autonomous.
Everything comes from the land, right? Everything comes from these base material resources. Learning about coppicing and pollarding, that changes whether I have to buy a handle for my axe or whether I can make one. Well, that's a big change on a societal level because almost nobody around me knows how to make their own axe handle, but we need the axes for some of the work that we're doing. Those axe handles can cost $30 a pop sometimes. If we're making those, we're saving people money over time. But we're also managing our environment around us in these sustainable ways. And so that helps us divest from the system, but at the same time, we're building something better. And we're learning to be in right relations. We're creating skills that we can share with others. The other thing is focus on in-person connections wherever you can. Don't try to build utopia online. Online is where you go to find people who agree with you on a lot of things, to troubleshoot, to come up with ideas. But you're never going to be able to build mutual aid with anybody who's like more than a couple hours from you. Belong where you are. If you hate where you are, move. Don't wait. Go ahead and do it as soon as you can. But if you're going to be where you're at, don't live with one foot out the door. If we hate the place we are, we will never invest in it. We'll never put our time to it. We'll never take care of it. We'll never learn the plants. We'll never learn the people. We'll never learn how to navigate the institutions as corrupt as they are to help one another. We'll never get in touch with our local homeless communities, right?
And start creating that world that we're trying to create. Don't just talk about it. This is kind of going a little bit full circle to the therapy conversation too, right? It's like, we're not going to make these changes in this one-on-one talking. Can we go out and actually live it, experience it, do it, live with purpose and joy? Is there anything that you want to put out there as far as if people want to find more about you or about different work that you want to give attention to?
I wrote an article that got put on the Anarchist Library called Social Fabric, Clothing in a Free Society. That, if you're interested in like what might some of this look like on a day-to-day scale, that focused specifically on how clothing would operate through mutual aid. I have a Tumblr. That's like the only social media I have that's public. It's Joyhaver, joy-haver. And you can reach out to me there. And I would just say, like, if you're local and you want to get in contact with me, I'm not hard to find. Just like literally ask and someone will point you to me. There's work to do and there are ways to be helpful. And the other thing I would just say is like, take a minute, go outside and look at like a tree or like something that's bent up. Look at like the angle of the vines, right? Look at the way that the light hits something. Breathe in as slowly as you can and just ask yourself, why is this so beautiful to me? And smile. And you will figure it out. Learn to look for the beauty in the world around you. If you don't appreciate it, you can never save it. You cannot hate the world and also save it. We say that your love for the oppressed must be bigger than your hatred for the oppressor. Personally, I ran out of hatred and anger a long time ago. I don't think there's honestly any space for it in this work. Love, joy, beauty. Reduce the amount of harm that you make. Understand that you will always harm. Offer help whenever you can, and always return to joy.
Perfect note, I think, to end on. Appreciate you.
Love and appreciate you.
Join the movement and keep the conversation going at deconstructingtherapy.com. And follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Deconstructing Therapy. If you found value in today's episode, please subscribe and rate us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you are able to and would like to help sustain the podcast, you can find us at buymeacoffee.com/deconstructingtherapy to show your support. Thank you for listening.